Hi, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. Glad to have you aboard. It is Tuesday, the 2nd of October, um, and it's 6 p.m. So if you're watching it live, you're here at 6 p.m. on Tuesday. Please feel free to call in. There's a lot going on in the city. There's a lot going on in education in the city. The call-in number is 640-3091. And as you know, I welcome your comments, whether you agree with me or vehemently disagree with me or whatever it is you would like to offer. I'm happy to have that conversation or to give you some time to speak your mind. So please feel free to do so. It's 640-3091. Okay, so tonight there is a Board of Mayor and Aldermen meeting tonight, which will have a number of impactful decisions to make. With regard to education, that meeting is on at 7, I believe. It may be the public participation at 7 and then the meeting at 7:30. So, but that meeting, one of the things it will do, which will be important for education in the city, is the meeting will decide which one of the four nominees for to take up the vacant spot on the Board of School Committee, which was vacated by Ms. Tezier a couple of months ago, and a wonderful lady who has given her life to Manchester schools in one form or another, as an educator, as an administrator, and most recently as a member of the Board of School Committee. And so with her departure, she has been unwell, I know, for some time, so I presume that it is for health reasons that she was withdrawing, or she felt she had to withdraw, and I want to wish her well, because she's one of the many people who have brought Manchester schools, in the good sense, to where they are today, and there are legions of young people who are better off for having had Ms. Tezier in their lives. So tonight, and I haven't reviewed the charter myself, but the way it works in Manchester is when there is a vacancy on the Board of School Committee, it is the Board of Mayor and Aldermen who choose who to elect, or who should elect is the wrong word, who to select from amongst a group of nominees. And so those who were nominated, there were four candidates nominated, and there will be a vote tonight to decide which one of those four will have that seat, which is an at-large seat. The Board of School Committee is made up of 14 individuals, 15 including the Mayor, which represent the 12 wards of Manchester, and then two at-large positions, similar to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. So this at-large position will be held by this new person for a period until the next election. And the next election for Board of School Committee will be, as it will be for Alderman and Mayor, will be next fall. So we have elections coming up in 5 weeks for congressional elections and Senate and state elections here in the state of New Hampshire, and governor, executive council, etc. But the local elections are the following year. And so let me take that sidebar to say I encourage people to go out and vote. It's incredibly important. Every vote matters in every election, but especially in these elections for our state representatives. There are so many, with 400 members of the House in Concord. It becomes difficult to keep track of them all, and there's a pretty low barrier to entry, and I don't mean the body any disrespect. I don't mean the many of the fine individuals who serve in that body any disrespect, but the New Hampshire House has now developed a long line of at best you could describe them as idiosyncratic or quixotic. But at worst, you might describe them as a bunch of sort of misfits, and it's like sometimes some of the people who are there like the island of misfit toys. because we've had people convicted of all kinds of crimes and of aberrant behaviour, of low morals, etc. And again, meaning no slight on many of the fine people who go there to do great work. Because you can get elected with representing a few thousand people, and it flies under the radar. For a lot of people, there are most people can't name who their state representatives are, and perhaps they can name their state senators, but on the House side it's much different. So I would ask you all and urge you to look up who your state senators are and make a study of it. So anyway, so tonight we have 4 candidates. I have stayed out of this matter. First of all, I don't think it matters very much to anybody. I don't give myself any credit for having the ability to influence very many people, if any. But I haven't offered my opinion. I do hope that whoever is elected or selected tonight, that they go there with the intention of working on behalf of students and in particular on behalf of public schools. That this job, I think the first question for anybody entering upon this endeavour from now on as a member of the Manchester Board and School Committee should be, is it your understanding of the position that you are there to work diligently to do what is best for the public schools of Manchester? Because there are people who are running for public office whose first interest is not to ensure that Manchester public schools remain healthy and strong and have the support of the community. When we have public representatives from Manchester leading the effort at state level to reduce funding coming from the public purse into Manchester, that's a shocking state of affairs. When we have people who are strongly in favour of the private schools and the privatisation of education and are working to move that agenda, and when they're holding seats, which they now do, on the Board of School Committee, that's a pretty frightening scenario. And when we see people up in Concord behaving, supporting people who are attacking public education, and they themselves attacking it, that's an extraordinary circumstance, and it seems to me a bridge too far, and people should be called out on it. I don't understand why there isn't a greater furore on this in Manchester, but perhaps we'll leave that for another day. So the 4 candidates who are, it's an interesting group of 4 people. I know them all pretty well, actually, to one degree or another. And so the 4 people are... the first one is a former school board member, Deb Langton, who represented Ward 2 on the school board for many cycles. Deborah Langton would be an addition to the school board, would bring to the school board her at one time in Manchester in recent years, there was a scenario, a structure, that it was almost like Deb Langton and Art Beaudry versus the remainder of the committee, is how it felt sometimes. Deb is an educator. She's an educator from another district. There are things that I don't agree with her about, and there are things that I do. She certainly has the qualifications for the job. So that's Deb, and then Deb Langton. And then there is another, and of course, Deb Langton did run for the office, not the at-large office, but in Ward 2, and was defeated. But she was a candidate in the most recent elections a year ago. That next brings us to the next candidate, who was the term Alderman Pat Long trips off the tongue, because Pat Long represented the I think it was Ward 3. For a long time as an alderman, and he also ran in the most recent local elections and was defeated by Alderman Tim Baines. and so Pat Long been has put his hat in the ring to run. It's not clear, I presume that the individuals who nominated these four people, approached them and asked them if they were interested in running. I don't know if any of them sort of did it the other way around, that they put their hand up and said, hey, somebody nominate me. So usually that's a process that happens on the back end. But in any case, Pat Long has agreed to start. He's a long-term public servant of the City of Manchester, a man who's done lots of work for the city. He's also a state representative in Concord. Pat Long brings to this job the advantage of having good relationships with many on the board of mayor and aldermen. I don't know if they're all perfect all the time. I'm not sure what his relationship might be with Tim Baines since they ran against each other. But I think they're both big boys and big people and big enough to get beyond that. But Pat certainly has a wealth of experience and would make an excellent school board member. And then the next candidate that in no particular order, but the next candidate is John Rist, and Mr. Rist is a former. This is the person who probably has the strongest credentials for educationally, given that Deb Langton is a teacher. But John Rist is a former administrator, a former state board of school board member, former principal of high schools in Manchester, and so. This is a guy who is a non-politician, which is, I think, admirable too, and gives that candidacy a little something different. He clearly is a man who's demonstrated through his lifetime's work that his first and I would imagine only agenda is the betterment of Manchester public schools. He's certainly a Manchester guy, as they all are, I think, or a Manchester person, and has definitely the best interests of Manchester public schools at heart. So it'd be interesting to see him in the seat, and then lastly, that brings us to the fourth person, Mike Porter, who my understanding is that Mike has a position with some state agency or the real estate board or something. I'm sorry, Mike, if I'm misrepresenting that, but that's the best of my recollection. And Mike comes from an old Manchester family and has kids in the system, and so having children in the school system is a good thing. However, I have to say that to be truthful, Mike and I have spoken and engaged on numerous occasions about public schools in Manchester. He definitely is interested in education. But my but about Mike is that he doesn't want to talk about the fact that Manchester school system is the least well resourced school system in the state of New Hampshire, and that we've got the highest number of the highest pupil teacher ratio. I think he's been ill-advised to be conducting battles on social media in the run-in to this decision tonight. I think it's just generally why stick your oar in those waters. And in one sense, and I've seen him say this, that his opinions are his opinions and he's not going to change them because he's running for public office. I think that's admirable. I disagree with his stance on many things, especially around the areas where he simply does not want to engage on any topic that would deliver $1 to the Manchester School District, other than if we can find it under a rock someplace or have it donated. So while I like Mike as a person, and I know that he is interested in education, frankly, I don't see Mike as somebody who is ready to put their shoulders to the wheel to see that Manchester schools get the additional resources they deserve. Now, I have to say, of course, that's based on my view that is the core of the problem. the main issue with our school district, amongst lots of issues that we may have, but that's the main one. And so, since we disagree on that, then I disagree with him, and that's that. So. We'll find out. The meeting's on tonight, on October 2nd, and we'll find out tonight who the person is, regardless of who it is. And I did, by the way, think about whatever word, endorsing, I suppose, but picking one, and actually, just because of no political calculation, no sort of, I can't say what I really think because it'll be problematic somewhere. It's just that when I look at these candidates, they are, as I described them, I think that they are all Manchester people, all four of them, in the sense, I mean by that more than just they live in Manchester, obviously, but I think that all of them have shown a commitment to the city of Manchester and are, I don't know if any of them have sort of bigger political dreams. I don't think so. I don't think Mr. Rist is a political person, and therefore I like that. I think Deb Langton has demonstrated she's been there a long time, so I think she's there to do the work she wants to do, and I think she was disappointed when she lost her seat because she was I think, up for and ready to engage with Dr. Vargas to move the district forward. And again, Pat Long, who had given I was going to say a lifetime of work, but a lot of time to public service in the city. And I see Pat, working on, say, the Valley Street Cemetery renewal project, etc. So these are all good people. So I hope the board makes a wise decision and that the board of school committee can move on and do its work. So there's a lot of other news, but before I get to it, let me just go to my a couple of things here from the Manchester School District, mansd.org. Now, the website's about to change, ladies and gentlemen, and so there are a lot of I saw some examples of it last night. I'll talk in a minute about the Parental Involvement Committee, and that meeting was on last night at Goslar. And it was interesting, and we'll get to that. But on the current website, and I encourage people to go to it, on the current website we have the coffee and conversations with the superintendent. So the next one is on tomorrow morning, and I might have to take out the glasses. Old age is a terrible thing, ladies and gentlemen. It comes to us all, or at least we hope it comes to us all. That's the only good thing about it. Long may it last, because the alternative is kind of dim. So tomorrow on the 3rd, coffee and conversations, and I think, where did I see it was? Coffee and conversation. Here we go. So October the 3rd is at 7:30 a.m. at McDonough School, right off of Bridge Street. So if you're heading out of town to go to work or something, or if you're in the area, McDonough School is easily accessible on the right-hand side at the top of Bridge Street as you head out of town. That's at 7:30 a.m. Have a quick coffee and move on from there. And then the other one, the following afternoon, on the afternoon of the 4th at 4:30 p.m. is Jewett Street, Jewett Elementary School on Jewett Street, of course. And so 4:30 on Thursday afternoon, or 7:30 tomorrow morning at McDonough. There was a discussion last night at the parental involvement meeting about this coffee and conversation with the superintendent. These meetings have generally been poorly attended, and so somebody at the meeting last night raised the thought about whether it was the best use of the superintendent's time. And I think that's worth thinking about, but ultimately I think it's an issue for the superintendent. I think it's a good thing. I think it's nice to know that he's out there doing it, even though if you as an individual don't go and avail yourself of it. I think knowing that the superintendent is accessible every month at different schools around the city, and that it's an open forum where you're free to ask whatever you like. And so by implication, there's an accountability there. Because the superintendent isn't going to have the answer to all your questions when you ask them. But if you're at Jewett Street School on Thursday afternoon at 4:30, and you ask the superintendent something, and he says, as he might often do, I don't know the details of that, but give me your contact information and we'll get back to you. Well, let's presume for some reason he doesn't, or his answer is unsatisfactory. You get to see him a couple of weeks later, or at most a month later. Some of these meetings are closer than that. So, yeah. So, sometimes there's two in a month. But in any case, he is accountable and he's there. And as I relayed at the meeting last night, a previous superintendent said to me once, I happened to meet him as we were entering City Hall for a Board of School Committee meeting, and he's, as part of the conversation, he said, today was a good day. And I said, why is that, Superintendent? And he said, well, because today I got out to the schools. And that came, we had a further conversation about that, and it turns out he went to the schools very irregularly. He did a tour on the opening day of schools when, he and Mayor Gatsis would ride around and do what I call the Queen of England tour, waving as one drove by the schools. I'm just saying that was the nature of it. But then he found that he wasn't in the schools for long periods after that. So to know the fact that our superintendent, the chief executive officer of our district, is out visiting schools is a good thing. Another dynamic that I've noticed is that, the fact that he goes into the schools, and I know for sure that he's in the schools very often, that he's not in his ivory tower, either at Granite Street or eventually in the new facility that's being built within West High School. But I've noticed that these coffee and conversations that sometimes there are the teachers from the building, as they're preparing a class or about to go into class or before they start class, have an opportunity to meet with the superintendent. So I think that's a good thing for sort of morale and for teachers to have direct, in any company, to have direct access to your ultimate, like the chairman of the board, the CEO of the corporation. That's a good thing. And then and I've heard them bring up shortcomings when they're there, and positives too in their buildings. But it's also important for the superintendent to walk into the building and just know what the ambiance of it is. Because you get a feeling when you walk in a school building of whether it's a place of learning, a place that's well managed and well kept and well organized, and you look at the staff members, you kind of get a buzz as to whether people are happy or not, and so I think it's important that the superintendent go out and do that. So many other things today. So just to last night's meeting. There was a meeting, there are a lot of meetings in Manchester about a lot of things touching on education. And last night, there is a committee called the Parental Involvement Committee. I think they may have a fourth member, but there are 3 school board members on that committee. It is chaired by Jimmy LaHoo, who was the impetus behind this. It was one of the things when he ran for office that he was there were a few things that he named as things that he was interested in engaging on, and the parental involvement issue was one of those. And so he's seen that to fruition, and this committee is set up, and it's doing a lot of different things, or at least a lot of stuff is being reported into it. They've had a survey online, which was accessible through the website, and they got responses from people about what people's main focus was, and one of those happened to be communication. And so we heard last night about the fact that there's a new website that's being created for the school district, and so the emphasis of this, it'll be I think like anything. Web pages have the habit of becoming staid and old and a little dated, and I don't just mean the content, the week by week content, but just the way they're laid out and things. So having a new layout will be good. I think we'll see what the ultimate changes will be, how the sort of sitemap works. One of the first exercises last night was that people who were at that meeting were asked to fill out some sticky notes and put them on some boards about what we thought might be the more important things that that the website, both at a school level and at a district level, what they might look like. What I saw, the first cut, so to speak, of the new district website. I mean, it looks nice. It'll be interesting to see what the tabs are and the drop downs are. So a discussion ensued on that. There was also a long discussion last night on the topic of communication more generally, and it's always a bugbear, and everybody sort of has the same information, but then people respond to it in different ways and see it as different things. But I've always felt that that sort of the vertical integration of our schools, that is the communication. So when a kid leaves elementary school and goes to middle school, both he or she is dropped off into this new school, and it's like being thrown into the deep end sometimes and left to swim. And I think kids may feel like that. I just know from watching them that they feel like that for no more than a half an hour, because they all seem to get on fine after the first day. But for parents, it can feel like that. Because the information that flows from elementary school in weekly envelopes or weekly communications coming back from the schools means that parents are up to date, etc. And part of that is that there's a presumption that elementary school kids are not able to carry, or not reliably able to carry, the information that's important from the school back to the parents. And so these methods are done like weekly newsletters or weekly envelopes and things like that. The difference in middle school is that there does come a time that kids have to start being responsible, and that's more difficult for some and easier for others. But by the time you get to high school, you better be sure that your kid is ready to sort of know their own schedule, understand what they need. I mean, if you're still, preparing your kids' books in the morning to make sure they got the right book for the right class when the kid's a sophomore, then there's a problem. And there's actually going to be a huge problem by the time the kid goes on to college or work or whatever else. I think parents sometimes, it's part of the nervousness of parents we hear when when their kid goes into middle school and they don't hear anything back, they're sort of inclined to blame the school. I'm not saying that that's not ever justified, but there is a process going on here too, where what works for an elementary school is not always going to work for a middle school, and certainly not for high school. But the whole issue of communication between the schools and the parents, and between the school district and the parents, is something that's being looked at. Committeeman Scannell, the members of the, I didn't finish with the members of the, so Jimmy LaHoo is the chairman. The other two committee members are committee member Mary Georges and committee member Scannell. There may be another one, but I think it's only three. There were three there last night at least. What's nice about the meeting is that it's sort of open forum. It's not a complete scatter, anybody talk whenever they want. But generally speaking, it's not a say 3 minutes and no response. There is a to and fro, which I find beneficial. Mr. Scannell made the point last night that the whole communication issue was required more, more effort, more people to do it, because Jen Gillis, the Assistant Superintendent Jen Gillis, who's responsible for curriculum and many, many other things like we do to people in Manchester, she was responding about what the school district was doing with regard to the website, with regard to improving communication vertically between elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. That there was lots of information there that I don't want to bore you with it. I know that the forum from that meeting last night will be on public access television. I'm not sure what the schedule will be, but it will be available, I'm sure, as a podcast or download or whatever it is pretty shortly. And it was nice to see Manchester Community Television there doing it last night. So one of the benefits of the new feeder system is that if we take in where it's starting, for instance, on the west side, but we're seeing it. That's the full redistricting thing. But we're seeing the benefits, I think, already also in the other parts of the city where there's this continuum, this connection between a set of elementary schools to a middle school to a known high school. And so Ms. Gillis shared with us last night that the district is already grouping together principals and administrators, and perhaps even teachers, but I took it to be principals and assistant principals, etc., from when they have their meetings, that they're grouping them together so that the feeder elementary schools to this middle school and to the high school they go to, that group of administrators sit together and share information together. And so I expect to see a great benefit to that kind of communication over time. On the west side, where there's now going to be this change with fifth grade going into moving up to the middle school, et cetera, there's already a lot of exciting stuff going on the west side of the city in education, between the work that the elementary schools are doing. Forrest Rendell, the principal of Parkside, is a force of nature and a guy who's very action oriented, and so he has been quietly, because he's not somebody who seeks the limelight, but he is somebody who's been doing a lot of work with regard to this and preparing his school for the for new kids coming in. But already, he has programs in place where rising sixth graders, people entering into sixth grade, that in the summer before they enter into his school, so that's the summer at the end of their fifth grade, there are opportunities to spend some time and visit with Parkside, etc. There's some organized dates and stuff like that. So all of that is good, and it's great to see it happening. And then, of course, we can't leave out Mr. Dishard at West High School and the wonderful things that are happening there. So, despite the challenges, despite where we are, I like the feeling that there is in the district. There are things I dislike, but I like the feeling in the district that there's movement happening. And I just wish people, those who have their boots on the neck, or perhaps the better example would be that have their foot on the hose, if they could just unkink the hose and take their boot off the hose, then things could get so much better so fast. But as I alluded to earlier when I was talking tonight, there are people on our Board of School Committee who see it as their job to keep a kink on that garden hose pipe, because they don't want to see the water flow out of it, because they're saving the water for their buddies elsewhere. And then with all our public representatives, the ones who choose not to send their kids to public education at all, I find that just beyond annoying. So wonderful things happening there. It was good there was lots of stuff happening at that meeting last night, which was exciting to hear. Lots of challenges too. But I have to say that I read on the newspaper today that it is expected, or at least it's very likely, that there will be an announcement at tonight's aldermanic meeting that a settlement has been reached, or a contract agreement has been reached between the firefighters who've gone a year and a half without a contract in the city of Manchester and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. I'm glad to hear that. If that's true, we'll know in an hour. I hope that it is. I hope that it's good for the taxpayers, and I hope that it's good for the fire department. I think it's terrible that in the city of Manchester, where so many great things are happening, that when it comes to this issue of paying people what they are worth, and of providing the services to the people of the city, that we have so many people within our body politic who are clogging up the wheels and trying to hold the city back. We had the exciting announcement last week of BAE Systems coming to the city of Manchester and buying, or eventually buying. They have an arrangement for the interim 10 years with the old Anthem building off of Brown Ave, which is a beautiful building, by the way, and a big campus. Go look at it in Google Maps or something. It's a big area. I know that I had suggested in the past that the Manchester School District look at that particular area and that particular building as perhaps something that might be suitable for a new high school in the city of Manchester that might have sort of one single high school kind of idea. I wasn't proposing it. I was proposing looking at it, and it had, I think it was on 20 acres or something, so it had the capacity for, there's lots of parking there, but it also had the capacity to put in playing fields, etc., etc. But however, I'm delighted that it's gone to BAE Systems, and that 400 jobs are coming to the city. When you look at that event, and you look at Southern New Hampshire University spending a few $100 million on a new parking garage with 1,600 people working in the downtown on Elm Street. We look at what's happening in the mill buildings, and Dean Kamen, leading the Army project, the ARMI. Project, $200 to $300 million investment. It's so frustrating in the face of that to listen to people holding out and saying, no, we can't spend any money on schools. No, we can't spend. It doesn't matter. I don't care what Nashua does. I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear about building new schools in Concord. I don't want to hear about Dover High School. I don't want to hear about what's happening at Conval and Sahegan. I don't want to hear about it. We're not doing it here. We can't afford it. Well, that's all BS, because we can't afford it. We choose not to afford it. I actually had a teacher say to me the other day something about, the problem is, we don't have the money. I'm like, we don't have the money because we decided not to collect the money. We don't have the money because we have public representatives up in Concord voting to have Manchester get less money. We don't have the money because we have cut education funding in the state. We don't have the money because we keep sending people up to Concord, elected representatives, that is, elected for the state, who vote not to have any funds for building, for instance, in this state. We've the least well-funded public school system, public university system, in the United States. Our students in the United States, college students in New Hampshire, have the highest level of debt upon graduation of any students in any state in the United States. That's how much we value education. So, ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake. It isn't that somehow there's some magic sauce in New Hampshire and in Manchester that nobody knows how it happened. We just don't have the money and we can't work it out. It's not even a question, ladies. This is like a first grade problem, like first grade, not in a top problem, like first grade high school kindergarten problem. It's very simple. Why don't we have the resources for our schools? The reason we don't have the resources for our schools is because we choose not to collect them, and we send people to Concord to take more of our money away. Because we keep electing, I don't want to be derogatory, we keep electing people, some of whom are devious in their claims about no new taxes, and some people who are so simple that they have this simple idea that, we just won't spend any more and we won't raise any more, or we'll raise less and we'll just find some way of squeezing the balloon tighter. And none of it is responsible. None of it makes any sense. We sweat the asset that we've been handed to by generations of the past. We're handed a great school system, the oldest high school in the state, great educators, great systems, great people, great institutions with long histories, and they're handed to a group of small-minded politicians that we have today in our city who cannot see beyond their noses and aren't politically brave enough to make the decisions to turn around to the taxpayers and say, look, I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer, none of us like taxes. I don't know anybody who likes taxes. But you are spending less on your schools than everybody else in the state, and we have to stop that. it is no longer viable, and I'm not going to agree to it. But so long as people are marching in lockstep ideologically behind a certain dated political theory, which is that you have to reduce spending and reduce spending and reduce spending. These kind of Luddites, and it is just a political opinion. I understand that, or an economic opinion, really wrapped up in politics. But it just doesn't bear scrutiny, and I pine for a time when people looked upon the common good and the public good and built institutions in this city and had great pride in ribbon cuttings and launchings and initiatives and openings, and saying, look at our city as it marches into the 20th century and on into the 21st century. And for something terrible happened, there was something lousy in the water of the Merrimack, or crept into Massabesic Lake in the last 15 years or so, that people have been somehow poisoned some people's minds into thinking that all that must come to an end, and so it's very frustrating. And that brings me to the issue with the firefighters we're going to hear. But let's talk about the teachers. So there was great fluff and noise and not so much fury, but lots of noise at the last Board of School Committee meeting about the teachers. Our teachers continue to work without a contract, and that's they're working without a pay increase. The average wage in the United States went up by 2.9% in the last 12 months. So, and that's the average wage. So professionals probably went up at the higher than the 2.9, and people, so. But in any case, 2.9 is the national number, so that's as close to 3% as we care. And so, if nothing else, besides the fact that they don't have their steps, etc., just over this coming year, what's going to come is that Manchester school teachers will be 3% less well off than they were the preceding year. And this continues to happen. Nashua, just as an example, not that I want to hold it up as the perfect solution, because it's not. Nashua has its own challenges, but this every year having more percentage-wise, having higher numbers of more money available to towns like Portsmouth and Nashua and Concord and elsewhere, and Manchester having the least amongst them, that has an accumulative effect. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it with teachers leaving our district. Thankfully, some of our public representatives who used to mouth off out of ignorance or lack of knowledge about how, the job's so good, we've got no problem filling positions, they're lining up to come into Manchester. Well, actually, they're not. And teachers are leaving, and we're losing some very fine teachers because they can get paid more elsewhere. And so, one by one, the underpinnings of these arguments about we're going to reduce waste, they have gone away, ladies and gentlemen. And what we're left with now is this ridiculous circumstance where the teachers of Manchester have no pay increase, no steps, and no COLAs, no nothing for this year. And the idea that the negotiations committee, which says it's acted in good faith, and I don't want to accuse anybody of not acting in good faith. I don't think that's sort of where it is. As I know nothing, I have no secret information about what's going on within that committee or what's going on between that committee and the teachers, and so other people may know. I don't. But it's very simple looking at it from the outside. Manchester, the alderman, passed a budget for the school district, $700,000 less than what the school district required. And the school district, in its requirements, didn't even ask for any money to pay teachers a dime additionally this year. So the Board of School Committee passed a request that they themselves didn't put any money in there for the teachers that they are ultimately the employers, or represent us as the employers for those teachers. God help them, because they're at the behest of these people who are often more looking to be re-elected to office than they are being to do the right thing. And so the Board of School Committee didn't pass any funds for teacher pay. Shame on them. Shame on them. They have a moral duty to look out for the employees that they employ in the city, just like they have a moral duty to look out for the taxpayers and to look out for the children and the students and the teachers and the schools. That's their role. And part of the role, not the only one, but part of their role is to ensure that our teachers get paid a living wage, a reasonable wage, and that whatever salary that they get is sufficient so that we can attract very good teachers, I would like to say the best teachers, into Manchester, and we can stop our best teachers from going down the road to go work someplace else. We heard 2 months ago about a position in Manchester where it was a principal position where the principal who was chosen in the interview process, eventually he just turned down the position and went a few miles down the road to another school, and the difference was $10,000 a year. So for $1,000 a month, people will go down the road. And that, by the way, was as a result of a beat-up negotiation and a concession granted by the administrators, by the principals' union in Manchester, that gave a concession to the city as part of the negotiations a couple of years ago, and said, we'll make a differentiation between, we'll drop the pay rates for assistant principals and principals by around that $10,000 or $12,000 number per year. I think it was 10% or 10,000 or something. So they dropped it and said, we'll agree to this. So the union agreed to it. Well, you can't make water flow uphill, ladies and gentlemen. The market drives these things, and the market dictates, and it's clear from what we've seen that our principals and vice principals, as the ones who were trying to get into the school district, that we're paying 10,000 less than comparable towns. And so that's what we've done to our system. Let me go from the Board of School Committee, which has overseen this fiasco. I blame all of them. I like many of them. They're all doing their best, I guess. Their best isn't good enough. And then we go to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen deliberately, under my friend Joyce Craig's leadership, decided to fund the school system at $700,000 less than they required. And I don't think there was anybody stupid enough on that board, no matter how they might pretend to be and appear to be even sometimes, there was nobody didn't know when they passed that budget that they had the largest group of employees in the city, people who go home and sit at dinner tables in houses from the north, south, east and west side of the city and put food on the table and pay gas for cars and clothe children and etc. They have to live a real life every night. They're out with their shopping basket at Market Basket in Hannaford buying food and trying to make ends meet. And we're handing teachers $35,000 or $37,000 a year. And they decided in the face of all of that, to heck with the teachers in Manchester. We're going to pass a budget, and we know when we pass it, there's no money there for you at all. And tough. Why don't you just write down in the calendar 2018 is going to be kind of a sucky year. And maybe 2019 as well, because I, as a public representative, have decided I'm going to be here for at least the next 2 years, and I'm not going to vote for it either next year. I'm never turning to my neighbours who say, John, Michael, whatever your name is, hold the line on taxes, don't spend another dime, you've got to do something about this. I'm never going to turn back and say, listen, we have the cheapest schools in the state. We're spending way less than we need to. Our buildings need help. We are squeezing the thing to bits. We're damaging our reputation as a city, locally, regionally, nationally. We need to do something. Our city is booming. There's stuff going on. People want to be here. We can't attract kids and families to our city. We can't improve our neighborhoods because people go on Zillow or some other website, they look it up and they say, that's not where I'm bringing my kids. They don't give a damn about education. They don't spend a dollar, so I'm not going there. And it is only either willful ignorance, it can only be willful ignorance to claim that that is not having an effect in our city. Everybody knows that that every realtor, you could talk to any realtor, you can talk to the most committed anti-tax libertarian or ultra right fiscal conservative, and you can ask any of the realtors who match that profile, and they will tell you that families don't want to move to Manchester. So when you know what the problem is, then you know what the answer is. Start by improving the budget in Manchester for schools, and then force. When public representatives from Manchester go up to Concord, and they take a vote that means that in one case $2.5 million a year less is coming to the city of Manchester, there should be screaming mobs. I mean this metaphorically, of course. There should be people screaming at them as they come down I-93. They should be met at the toll booths on 93 and be told, your days as a public representative in Manchester are over. You took resources out of our schools. You took spoons out of the mouths of our children. You're not wanted here anymore. Take your political philosophy and go someplace else. Go back whence you came from. We don't want you here destroying our public schools. People need to be forceful and strong. And then when we get some of our doddering older politicians who pretend to be a little unsure of themselves, and I thought I was doing the right thing, well, I was just thinking, and well, one guy said to me, and well, it was very confusing, so what? So you voted to damage public schools in Manchester, up in Concord, because you were with your buddies? What the heck is that? Hold these people up. Shine the bright light on them. A condition of being a public representative in Manchester ought to be that you do not go out of town and vote against the people of Manchester, the taxpayers of Manchester, the students of Manchester, and sully and damage Manchester's bright potential future. It is not acceptable. People should be fired up about it, and they should tell these people this must stop now. And then those people in our public, amongst our public representatives who are advocating for the privatization of schools, for taking money out of our schools and giving it to private schools, those people need to be taken aside, and we need to convince them the error of their ways, but they should be told in no uncertain terms that if you want to be a member of the school board in Manchester, then you need to commit to Manchester Public Schools. You can hate unions if you want, because that might be your thing. Maybe you had a bad experience in childhood. Maybe you came here from some other state where trade unionism did terrible things or something. So maybe that's your rationale for disliking teachers and voting against teacher contracts. Maybe that's why you dislike public schools. Just as an aside, since I'm on a flyer here, let me just say that I know that I'm a big, as a Catholic, I happen to be a big fan of Catholic schools, which is kind of weird, I know you might think. I'm not a fan of the private, of public money going to them, though. I think that people who can afford it and who want to and would like a religious education for their kids, then there should be nobody standing there stopping them to do it. I think that that's a freedom that they have, and they ought to have. And there's a long tradition of that. I think it's I think it's great. I oppose the idea of taking money from an already poorly financed public school system and handing it to private schools. But I can tell you that when the Catholic Church itself did a survey of its own schools in New Hampshire, about maybe close to 10 years ago now, there were 4 or 5 major findings that the Catholic Church had of its own religious schools, many of them wonderful schools. But the first finding of the five major findings, after like a 6-month-long review process, etc., the first finding was that the level of pay that Catholic schools were paying their teachers was, and I wish I could remember the exact word, but it was like either immoral or unjust or unjustifiable or inhuman. It was a strong word for the Catholic Church to use about its own teachers. They themselves were saying, we are paying these people. In other words, they're relying on the goodwill of well-intentioned people who have strong faith, who work in schools for much less than what they could work elsewhere because they are deeply committed. Bully for them, good for them. But the people who want to now take the scarce public funding that exists and take the little taxes that somebody pays who's a taxi driver or a catering worker, bussing tables, or a janitor, or whatever jobs they may have, and the few dollars that they have, what taxes are taken from them as they're trying to scrape pennies together, and to have that money be given to people driving 2019 SUVs worth $45,000, $55,000, $60,000 so they can drop off their little kids at some fancy academy. Are you kidding me? While the kids of the city of Manchester have to go without a seat to sit on, or a book to have properly, or not enough teachers in the classroom, or a stairs that's damaged or broken or is not swept properly, or not having enough resources in the school for anything. And you, as a member of the Manchester School Board, have the gall to suggest that we should take some money from that system and we should give it to people who are clearly much better off than the kids going to Manchester public schools. Not all of them, because it's not as though they're not wealthy people going to Manchester public schools. This all has to stop, ladies and gentlemen. It's not that complicated. The idea that we don't have the money for some magic reason that nobody can work out is all happy horse manure. There clearly is a solution. It's just that our political leaders don't have the will. They don't have the moral fortitude. They don't have the courage to face up to the people, not in a confrontational way, but lead. Part of the word leadership begins with the word lead. You're not just a public representative, you are a political leader of the city. And people like me and others rely upon you to let us know what it is our city needs. That's what we elected you for, because we're busy living our lives every day. We don't have time to go to the meetings you go to. You wanted to go, well then go. The deal is you're supposed to look after our interests while you're there, not play political games with buddies from Washington or Concord and do damage to our city. I have to say something tonight. There's just as an example of some of the good things, the many good things that are happening in our city, is that there was an announcement actually today that Manchester schools would be getting funding from. I hope I have it on here. So Manchester Schools is to benefit from a grant money aimed at getting low-income students into college. I think this is great. So it's going to be about. It's $1.5 million per year for 7 years for programs to help kids with college preparation and for low-income kids. I'm all for stuff being done with the trades and with training kids for work. It's all good, but the fact is that we've had Pell Grants eliminated for the first time this year. They've been eliminated, so those are for the poorest families in the United States. In Congress, the majority in Congress said that the funding mechanism for students for college was too complicated and it needed to be simplified. Well, to simplify it, what they did was they took a program for the poorest families in America and they eliminated it. That's their commitment to. So it's nice to see that the City of Manchester is going to get $1.5 million. That's a big deal, and congratulations to the people who worked upon it, our congressional delegation and Mayor Craig and others. Everybody, I guess, wants a piece of the glory, but whoever deserves it, good for them. That's a wonderful thing to see. We also have the first of the Keno money, which we'll deal with at another time, but it looks like Manchester will get about $1 million or so a year on the Keno money to come into the city. That's great news for our city tonight. No thanks to some of the people I was talking about earlier. And then lastly, I'd like to finish with this. There's a young man who was on tonight who's a student from Central High School from not this year, the previous year. So he's a sophomore he's down at Harvard University, one of many Manchester students at Harvard University, which is a wonderful thing. But when I saw him on CNN today as a guest panelist, and I'm thinking, here we have a 20-year-old young man, from Manchester, speaking with authority and conviction and knowledge on CNN. He was mentioned on ABC News this morning. In one sense, it's not a lot. In another sense, it is a lot. So congratulations to Aidan Ryan on that success, and to the teachers who produced them, and of course his wonderful parents and everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of another night here in Manchester. Thank you for being with us, and I look forward to hearing from you and seeing you again this time next week. All the best now. Bye-bye.